The rat's teeth were 3 inches from my throat when I realized I'd made a fundamental miscalculation about how fast a 50-pound mutant rodent could move. Let me be specific about what I mean when I say rat. Because this wasn't some garbage-eating rodent you see scurrying across subway tracks. This was 50 pounds of mutated muscle and rage, with yellow teeth the length of my fingers and eyes that glowed red like they'd swallowed dying stars. And it was fast. Wrong fast. And the kind of fast that makes your brain stutter because evolution didn't prepare humans to process that much mass moving that quickly in an enclosed concrete space where the air smells like death and your own fear sweat and the bucket toilet you've been using for 18 months. I had maybe half a second. My crossbow was empty. The bolt I'd just fired was buried in another rat's skull 10 feet away, and I could hear it still twitching, claws scraping concrete. My spear was across the shelter, propped against the wall next to the hand-crank ventilation system that my grandmother had been operating for the past 6 hours, because I'd been too exhausted to continue. The Glock was down to its last magazine, 17 rounds. I was saving those for something worse than mutant rats. Which seems funny now. Because in that moment, with sewage and death breath filling my nose and claws that could rip through denim like tissue paper coming at my face, I couldn't imagine anything worse. "To Jack!" That was Grandma Martha screaming from behind me. 74 years old, and she could still shatter glass with those lungs when she was terrified. I fell backward, not gracefully. I fell like a 30-year-old plumber whose arms were burning from cranking a ventilation fan for 6 hours straight, and whose last decent meal had been canned beans 3 days ago. The rat sailed over me. Its claws caught my shoulder, opening 3 parallel cuts through my shirt and into muscle. And I felt the bite of it, felt blood start to flow warm and fast, but didn't have time to care because the thing was already twisting mid-air, correcting its trajectory, coming back for round 2. That's when Noir hit it. My cat, if you can still call a 100-pound mutant with obsidian claws and glowing red eyes a cat, came out of the darkness like liquid shadow. His jaws clamped on the rat's spine with a crack I felt in my teeth. The rat squealed, not like an animal, like a human child. High-pitched and aware and agonized. Noir shook his head once, sharp, final. The squealing stopped. I scrambled backward until my spine hit concrete, breathing hard, tasting copper and fear. "Jack!" Martha's voice was shaking. "Are you—" "I'm okay, Grams." I touched my shoulder, felt wetness, decided to worry about infection later. "I'm okay." But I wasn't okay. None of us were okay. We'd been living in this concrete tomb for 18 months, eating mutant rat meat when we could catch it. Breathing recycled air through filters I'd built from Home Depot supplies and desperation. Using a bucket toilet that no amount of quicklime could make not horrifying. And the worst part, the absolute worst part that kept me awake during my 4-hour sleep shifts. We had no idea if anyone else was still alive. No idea if the fog would ever lift. No idea if we were the last humans in Queens or New York or the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Let me tell you how the world ended. Not with nukes or zombies or any apocalypse we'd been warned about, but with fog. Toxic, mutagenic fog that turned America's largest city into a graveyard in 72 hours. And how 3 people, a plumber, an old woman, and a cat, somehow survived when millions didn't. Part 1. The last normal day. February 14th, on 2026. 2:47 p.m. The thing about apocalypses is they don't announce themselves. There's no ominous music, no dark narrator warning you that your life is about to end. Just Tuesday afternoon in Queens, fixing a leaky pipe under Mrs. Walsh's kitchen sink, thinking about what to grab for dinner. I was under that sink when I first heard about the factory reopening. The pipe was old, 1960s galvanized steel that should have been replaced when Reagan was president. Water in Queens is hard, full of minerals and chemicals and God knows what else, and it eats through metal like acid through paper if you give it enough time. "You fix?" Mrs. Walsh leaned over me, backlit by her ancient fluorescent lights. She was maybe 70 years old, second-generation Irish from Queens, and made the best soda bread I'd ever tasted in my life. "Almost," I grunted, putting more muscle into the wrench than was probably necessary. Cold water dripped directly into my face, making me blink. It tasted metallic, bitter. Wrong somehow, though I couldn't have told you exactly why. "This whole section needs replacing, though, Mrs. Walsh. Not just a patch job. The pipe's got maybe 6 months left before it bursts completely." "How much replace?" "For you? 300. Parts and labor." She made a face like I'd just quoted her $3,000. But we both knew 300 was cheap for NYC plumbing work. And I gave her the family rate because she'd known my grandmother Martha for 40 years, because she brought us food during holidays, because I genuinely liked her. Okay, you come back next week. I have money then." "Deal." The TV in her living room was on. It was always on, tuned to one of those 24-hour news channels that just recycled the same stories every hour with slightly different panic levels. And some anchor with teeth too white for Queens was talking about something I wasn't really listening to. Until I heard one specific word: reactivate. My hands froze on the wrench. The Patterson chemical plant in New Jersey, dormant since 1989, will resume full operations as part of the Department of Defense's expanded Strategic Production Initiative. Even with tensions in the Pacific Theater reaching what officials are calling a critical threshold, the facility will begin manufacturing. "You want tea?" Mrs. Walsh called from the kitchen, her voice cutting through whatever the anchor was about to say next. "No thanks, Mrs. Walsh. I got another job at 3. But I kept watching the TV. Something about the news anchor's face bothered me. He was smiling, that professional news anchor smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Behind the smile, behind the professional delivery, he looked scared, really scared. Concerns about environmental impact and worker safety have been overruled by national security priorities under the Emergency Production Act. The Patterson facility, which was shut down following an undisclosed incident in 1987, will produce what military officials are calling strategic defensive materials, though specific details remain classified. Strategic defensive materials. That's government speak for weapons, and chemical weapons specifically, given the plant's history. The Patterson facility had been shut down after some kind of incident in the late 80s. I didn't know the details because I'd been negative 3 years old at the time, but I remembered my grandfather mentioning it once. Something about contamination, something about workers getting sick, something bad enough that they'd closed the whole place down and pretended it didn't exist for 30-plus years. And now they were firing it back up because of tensions in the Pacific, because of something happening on the other side of the world that was apparently bad enough to warrant reactivating a facility that had been deemed too dangerous to operate. I felt something cold settle in my gut. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. That same sixth sense that tells me when a pipe is about to burst before I even look at the pressure gauge. And that instinct that's kept me from getting electrocuted or gassed or crushed by falling equipment over 10 years of plumbing work. Something bad was coming. I packed up my tools, wrench, pipe cutter, thread tape, all the pieces of my mobile workshop, and took Mrs. Walsh's cash. $350s that she counted out from an envelope like they hurt to part with, which they probably did given that she was living on whatever tiny fixed income kept her in that apartment. "Thank you, Mrs. Walsh. I'll be back next week with the parts." "You good boy, Jackie. Your grandma very lucky." I smiled despite myself. Only Mrs. Walsh and my grandmother still called me Jackie. Everyone else had figured out by the time I hit 20 that I preferred Jack. I headed back to my van. It was a white Ford Transit 10 years old, scratched to hell from a decade of tight Queens parking spots with Harlan Plumbing stenciled on the side in letters that were peeling at the edges. And it smelled like PVC cement, pipe joint compound, and the chocolate protein shake I'd spilled last week and never fully cleaned up. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute, engine off, just thinking. The news was probably overblowing it. They always did. Turned every story into a crisis to keep people watching. And even if the plant was genuinely dangerous, it was in New Jersey, across the Hudson River. Far enough away that Queens shouldn't be directly affected, right? And my phone buzzed. Text from Grandma Martha. Don't forget cat food. Noir ate all the tuna again. I smiled despite the knot of worry in my stomach. Noir was our 5-year-old black cat with an attitude problem and a tuna addiction. I'd found him as a kitten in a storm drain behind our building 6 years ago, skinny, hissing, covered in motor oil. And he'd been the most ungrateful rescue animal in the history of rescue animals. I loved that stupid cat. On my way, I texted back. Queen will stop at bodega. I turned the key. The engine coughed, caught, settled into its familiar rattle that I kept telling myself I'd fix next week and never did. I pulled out into traffic, heading toward 43rd Avenue where I'd lived my whole life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February, cold but clear, one of those rare winter days where the sky is that perfect blue that makes you forget you're in one of the most polluted cities in America. That's when I saw the fog. At first, I thought it was smoke, some building fire maybe. But it was the wrong color, yellowish-gray instead of black or white. And it was moving wrong, not drifting with the wind, but rolling, creeping, spreading outward in tendrils that seemed to have their own volition, their own purpose. I watched it creep past a bodega on the corner of Roosevelt Avenue, past a fire hydrant, past a woman walking a small white dog, looked like a West Highland Terrier, the kind that costs more than my van. And the dog started barking, not normal barking, panicked, frantic barking. The kind that says something is fundamentally wrong with the world and why aren't you listening to me? The woman yanked the leash, annoyed. Rocco, stop it! What's wrong with you? But Rocco kept barking, kept pulling backward, trying desperately to get away from the fog. Smart dog. I checked my watch. 3:15 p.m. The streetlights clicked on. All of them. Every single streetlight I could see suddenly flickering to life in the middle of the afternoon on a clear February day. Okay, I said out loud to my empty van. That's definitely not normal. I drove faster. Home. 4:47 p.m. Home was a 6-story brick walk-up on 43rd Avenue, built in 1962 during the Cold War boom when the government was terrified of Soviet nukes and everyone was building bomb shelters in their basements. And the building looked exactly like what it was. Soviet-style architecture in the middle of Queens. Brutal, utilitarian, all hard angles and brown brick and windows that leaked air in the winter and didn't open far enough in the summer. The kind of building that screamed, we built this to survive the apocalypse, but also, we didn't care if you were comfortable while surviving. I'd lived there my whole life. 3rd floor, apartment 3C, me and Grandma Martha. My parents had died when I was 8. Car accident on the Long Island Expressway. Drunk driver running a red light at 2 a.m. One of those tragedies that's somehow both completely random and entirely predictable. Martha raised me after that. Taught me how to fix things, how to work hard, how to survive in a city that doesn't care if you live or die. She was 74 now. Sharp as ever. Opinions about everything and zero patience for nonsense. And also the only family I had left in the world. I climbed the stairs. The elevator had been broken for 6 months and the landlord kept promising to fix it next week, which was apparently landlord speak for never, and unlocked our door. "That you, Jackie?" Martha called from the living room. She was the only person who still called me Jackie. Everyone else had figured out by the time I hit 20 that I preferred Jack. "Yeah, Graham's got the cat food." "Thank God. And that animal has been yowling at me for an hour. I swear he understands English and he's just being an asshole on purpose." I found Noir sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, tail wrapped around his paws, staring at me with those unblinking yellow eyes that cats have. He meowed once, imperious, like I was late with his tribute and there would be consequences. Yeah, Your Majesty." I cracked open a can of tuna, the cheap kind from the bodega, not the fancy albacore he preferred but which we couldn't always afford, and dumped it in his bowl. He sniffed it, looked up at me, looked back at the bowl. The expression on his face clearly said, "You expect me to eat this garbage? It's that or dry food, buddy, your choice." He ate it, but slowly, resentfully, making absolutely sure I understood that this was under protest and he would be filing a complaint with management. "Jackie, come look at this." I walked into the living room still smelling like Mrs. Walsh's pipes and the industrial solvent I used to clean my tools. Martha was in her usual chair, ancient lazy boy recliner that should have been replaced sometime during the Clinton administration, but which she refused to give up because it was broken in just right. She was staring at the TV CNN. The anchor looked even more scared than the local news guy had. Mass evacuations being reported in northern New Jersey as the chemical leak continues to spread. Officials are now saying the situation is actively evolving, but maintain that there is no immediate threat to... The screen cut to helicopter footage. Even through the camera's lens, even from however many hundreds of feet up the helicopter was flying, you could see the fog. It looked like someone had poured yellow-gray paint across the landscape, thick enough to hide buildings, even thick enough to look almost solid, like you could walk on it. "They're saying it's just fog," Martha said. Her voice had that tone, the one that meant she didn't believe a single word coming out of the TV. "It's not just fog," I said. "No, it's not." She looked at me, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "You saw it?" "On my way home. It's already in Queens." "How far?" I thought about the street where I'd seen it, tried to calculate distances in my head. Maybe 10 blocks from here. Could be closer by now. It's moving slow, but it's definitely moving. We sat in silence for a minute, watching the news cycle through the same non-information. Officials urging calm, experts saying the fog was likely harmless. Politicians promising investigations and answers and help that we all knew wasn't coming fast enough. Nobody was saying what needed to be said, and nobody was saying evacuate immediately. Nobody was saying this is a disaster. Nobody was saying you're on your own. But even if they did, where would we go? I had maybe $3,000 in savings. Martha was on a fixed Social Security income of $1,100 a month. We didn't own a car that could make it out of the city. The van barely made it across Queens most days without making concerning engine noises. And even if we could afford to leave, where would we go? Every hotel within 100 miles would be booked solid within an hour of an evacuation order. We'd end up sleeping in the van in some highway rest stop, no better off than staying home. Worse, probably, because at least home had walls and food and familiar ground. "I'm going to the store," I said, standing up. "What for?" "Supplies, just in case." "Jack, grams, please, just let me do this. It's probably nothing, but I'd rather have supplies we don't need than need supplies we don't have." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. She'd survived the Great Depression as a child. She'd lived through World War II. She'd been through enough crises to know when to trust gut instinct over official reassurances. Make a list. Don't buy stupid things. And for God's sake, don't panic buy toilet paper like those idiots during COVID. Yes, a ma'am. I grabbed a notebook from the kitchen junk drawer, the kind with a spiral binding that was falling apart, and started writing. Not a panic list, a smart list. The kind of list you make when you've watched enough disaster movies and survival shows to have absorbed some basic principles through cultural osmosis. Water. First priority. Humans can survive 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. Food, non-perishable, high-calorie, stuff that would last. Light, flashlights, batteries, candles, first aid. Because getting injured during a disaster is a great way to die of something stupid and preventable. And then I added some items that probably seemed paranoid, but which my gut was absolutely screaming at me to get: plastic sheeting for sealing doors and windows, duct tape, because duct tape fixes everything, respirator masks, the good kind, N95 or better, activated carbon, for filtering air and water. My phone buzzed. A text from Mike, my friend who bartended at Murphy's pub down the street. "You seeing this fog shit? Looks like that Stephen King movie, The Mist." "Yeah," I texted back. "Stay inside if you can." "Can't. Got shift at 6, need the money." I almost told him to call in sick. Almost. But Mike had 2 kids and an ex-wife who needed child support. He couldn't afford to miss shifts, not with rent in Queens being what it was. "Be careful," I sent instead, knowing it was inadequate. "Always am. Catch you later." I pocketed my phone, grabbed my wallet and keys. "Be back in an hour," I told Martha. "Be careful, Jackie." "Always am, Grams." Noir looked up from his tuna, watching me with those knowing yellow eyes. His ears were flat against his head, his tail was low. The universal cat signal for something's wrong, something's dangerous, why aren't you paying attention to this? I should have realized then. You should have seen the way he was acting. That animal instinct for danger that's sharper than any human sense. But I didn't. I was too focused on my list, on getting supplies, on doing something that felt like preparation, even though I had no real idea what I was preparing for. I walked out the door. I wouldn't walk back through it as the same person. Home Depot, 5:32 p.m. The Home Depot parking lot was already half empty, not because people were panic buying, and because people were going home early. Getting off work, avoiding the fog that was now visible from the highway, a yellow-gray wall stretching across the horizon like something out of a disaster movie. Inside, the store was weirdly quiet. A few contractors buying supplies for jobs, a couple browsing paint samples like the world wasn't ending outside. Normal Tuesday evening crowd. I grabbed an orange cart and started loading. Water first, the big 5-gallon jugs. I took 10 of them. At 40 pounds each, my cart was already getting heavy, but I kept going. Food. I hit the section where they sell emergency supplies, vacuum-sealed meals, energy bars, stuff designed to last years in a bunker. I cleared the entire shelf, loading everything into my cart. The other customers were starting to stare, but I didn't care. Batteries, every size, D-cells, C-cells, AAS, AAAs, anything that could power a flashlight. Flashlights. 12 of them. And the heavy-duty kind with LED bulbs that could run for days on a single charge. Candles. I grabbed 2 boxes of those religious candles from the Latino section. Tall glass cylinders with saints on them. They burn for like 70 hours each. Hardware. PVC pipe in various diameters, duct tape, silicone caulk, zip ties, rope. Basically everything I could think of that might be useful for sealing a space or building something. Filters. This was where my plumber knowledge came in handy. And I grabbed HVAC filters, the expensive kind with activated carbon for removing particles and odors. Also grabbed straight activated carbon pellets, 50 pounds of the stuff, the kind you use in water filtration systems. Wood, they had pallets stacked outside, free for the taking if you asked nicely. I made a mental note to grab a few on my way out. My cart was overflowing. I'd spent maybe 20 minutes in the store and I'd already dropped close to $800. And the cashier, a kid maybe 19 with acne and a Home Depot apron that hung loose on his skinny frame, started scanning items. His hands were shaking slightly. "Big project?" he asked, trying to make conversation the way cashiers do. "Something like that." "This about that fog." I looked at him. Really looked. The kid was scared. You could see it in the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes kept darting to the windows. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I'm just being prepared. My mom wants us to leave. Go stay with my aunt in Pennsylvania. That might be smart. My boss says if I leave, I'm fired. We're not supposed to evacuate unless the city says so officially." Jesus Christ. "Kid, no job is worth your life. My mom needs the money. My dad left last year and—" He stopped himself, embarrassed at having shared too much with a stranger. "Sorry. TMI. No, it's—" I wanted to tell him to quit, or to grab his mom and get the hell out of Queens while they still could. But I also remembered being 19, remembered needing every paycheck, remembered that sick feeling when you have to choose between safety and survival. "Just be careful, okay? And if it gets worse, forget the job. Family comes first." He nodded, not convinced, but trying to be. Total, $847.32. I loaded everything into the van, then went back for the pallets. Grabbed 3 of them, and stacked them in the cargo area alongside all the supplies. The fog was closer now, maybe 5 blocks away. I could see it rolling down Roosevelt Avenue, streetlights clicking on in its wake even though the sun hadn't set yet. Wouldn't set for another hour. I drove home faster than I should have, running 2 yellow lights that were definitely about to turn red. The basement, 7:15 p.m. Most people don't know about the fallout shelters. During the Cold War, when everyone was paranoid about Russian nukes and mutually assured destruction, the government mandated that certain buildings had to have designated shelter spaces. Mostly in the basements. They'd reinforce the walls with extra concrete, install heavy steel doors, set up ventilation systems that could theoretically filter out radioactive fallout. Then the Soviet Union collapsed and everyone forgot about them. Except the buildings still had them. The doors still worked. The ventilation system still functioned more or less. Our building's shelter was in the basement behind a door marked Fallout Shelter, capacity 50 persons. The door was steel, 8 inches thick, with a wheel lock like you'd see on a submarine hatch. Beyond it was maybe 400 square feet of reinforced concrete, walls 3 feet thick, ceiling 2 feet thick, built to survive a nuclear blast at close range, or theoretically toxic fog. I'd been down there twice in my life, once as a kid, exploring the building with my friends, daring each other to go into the creepy bomb shelter. Once as an adult plumber, fixing a water leak that had somehow found its way through 3 feet of concrete. Tonight would be my 3rd visit, and probably my last time coming back up. I propped open the steel door. It weighed maybe 300 pounds and moved like it resented existing, and started hauling supplies down. The van to the apartment to the basement. I up and down, my arms burning, my back screaming, my brain doing math about how long this was going to take and whether I had enough time before the fog reached our building. 2 hours. It took 2 full hours to move everything: water jugs, food boxes, batteries and flashlights and candles, PVC pipe, pallets. All of it down 3 flights of stairs and through the basement and into that concrete tomb. Her Grandma Martha watched me from the apartment doorway during one of my trips up. "Jackie, what are you doing?" "Preparing." "For what?" "For whatever's coming." She wanted to argue. I could see it in her face, see her weighing whether this was paranoia or prudence. But she was also a Depression-era kid, had lived through World War II, had survived more shit than I could imagine. She knew when to trust gut instinct. "What do you need me to do?" she asked instead. "Y'all pack a bag, essentials only. Medications, clothes, anything you can't replace." "For how long?" That was the question, wasn't it? "I don't know, Grams. Could be a day, could be a week, could be—" I stopped myself. No point in scaring her more than necessary. "Just pack for 2 weeks. We'll figure it out from there." She nodded and disappeared into her bedroom. By 10 p.m., I'd done everything I could think of. Supplies were in the shelter. I'd set up a crude air filtration system using the activated carbon and HVAC filters wedged into the ventilation duct. I'd organized the food by category and expiration date. I'd tested the hand crank ventilation system. It worked barely, but my arms felt like jelly after 5 minutes of cranking. The shelter had 4 metal bunk beds with thin mattresses that smelled like mildew and institutional neglect, and a chemical toilet in one corner that I'd already upgraded with my bucket and lime system. A small folding table, 3 metal folding chairs that had probably been down there since 1962. It looked like a prison cell, but it might save our lives. I went back upstairs one last time. Grandma had packed a small suitcase, very organized, very her. She'd included medications, a change of clothes, her reading glasses, a photo album, practical but sentimental. Noir was in his carrier on the kitchen table, making loud, unhappy sounds that clearly communicated his opinion of this entire situation. "Are we really doing this?" Martha asked quietly. I walked to the window and looked out. The fog was maybe 2 blocks away now, and it had changed. It wasn't yellow-gray anymore. It was darker, denser, like ink spreading through water. And every streetlight, for as far as I could see, was blazing, even though it was only 10 p.m. in February. And then I saw the man. He was walking down the sidewalk below our window, just normal Tuesday night walking, probably coming home from work or a bar or wherever people go on Tuesday nights. He was maybe 40 years old, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase. Normal, ordinary, human. The fog hit him. For a second, nothing happened. He kept walking, took 2 more steps. Then he stopped, set down his briefcase, raised both hands to his face, and started scratching. Not casual scratching, not, "Oh, I've got an itch" scratching, frantic, desperate, clawing at his own skin scratching. At his cheeks, his neck, his forehead, his arms, through his suit jacket. I watched in horror as he drew blood, as his fingernails raked across his face, leaving red trails. As he kept scratching, kept clawing, pieces of skin coming away on his fingernails, and he didn't stop. Couldn't stop, just kept tearing at himself like his skin was on fire. He was screaming, and I couldn't hear it through the window, but I could see his mouth open wide, could see the shape of agony. Then something moved in the fog behind him. Something big. At first I thought it was another person, then I thought maybe it was a dog. A really big dog. But the way it moved, low to the ground, sinuous, the silhouette all wrong for any mammal I knew, made my stomach drop. It rose up behind the man. I caught a glimpse of scales, of something reflecting the streetlight, of a head that was triangular and flat and way too big. A snake. A fucking massive snake, easily 20 feet long, thick as a fire hydrant. The man never saw it coming. One moment he was there, screaming and clawing at his ruined face. The next moment the snake struck and he was gone, pulled into the fog so fast I barely registered the movement. Grams, I said, my voice surprisingly steady given that I was pretty sure I was about to throw up or pass out or both. We need to go to the basement right now. Jack, right now, no discussion, move. Something in my tone, maybe the fear that I was no longer able to hide, made her move. She grabbed her suitcase without another word. I grabbed Noir's carrier and we ran. Down the stairs, my legs shaking with adrenaline, through the basement door, into the shelter. I spun the wheel lock with both hands, throwing all my weight into it, and felt the bolt slide home with a heavy metallic chunk that echoed in the concrete space. February 14th, 2026. 10:34 p.m. The last time I would breathe fresh air for the next 18 months, the last time the world would make sense. The moment everything changed. Part 2. The concrete tomb, day 1. The ceiling, the silence after we closed that door was absolute. Not quiet, not peaceful, absolute. And the kind of silence that presses on your eardrums until you can hear your own heartbeat. And it sounds like drums in a tomb, like your body announcing to the universe that you're still alive even though you've just sealed yourself in a concrete box that might become your grave. Martha sat on one of the lower bunks, still holding her suitcase in both hands like she wasn't sure whether to unpack or keep it ready in case we needed to run again. Noir's carrier sat on the floor beside her, Ida the cat inside making low, continuous, unhappy sounds. Not quite meowing, not quite growling, just pure feline displeasure. "How long?" Martha asked. Not, "How long do we have to stay?" or "How long until it's safe?" Just, "How long?" Because we both knew those other questions didn't have answers. "I don't know, Grams." I checked the door seal methodically, running my fingers around the edges, feeling for any gaps where air might seep through. And found a few spots where I could feel the tiniest draft. Grabbed the silicone caulk from our supplies and sealed them, squeezing the tube until my hands cramped. Added wet cloth stuffed into the gaps for good measure. Covered that with duct tape. By the time I finished, we were truly sealed in. No air coming in except through the ventilation duct that I'd already fitted with my makeshift filtration system. For better or worse, this was it. I lit 3 candles, those religious ones with saints on them, and placed them around the shelter. They cast warm, flickering light that made shadows dance on the concrete walls, turning the space into something that looked almost cozy if you ignored the fact that we were underground in a Cold War bunker hiding from toxic fog. "We should set up a schedule," I said, more to fill the silence than because I thought Martha needed to be told. "Routines help. Keep us sane." Martha nodded, and she understood. You don't survive the Great Depression without learning that routine is what keeps people from falling apart when the world is ending around them. "The ventilation fan needs to run constantly," I explained, gesturing to the hand crank system mounted on the wall. "But it's all mechanical, no electricity, so we take shifts. I'm thinking 15 minutes of cranking, then 5 minutes of rest. We alternate every 4 hours. I can crank a fan. You Jackie." Grams, Jack Henry Harlan. She full named me, which meant she was serious. "I am 74 years old, not dead. I can turn a goddamn crank for 15 minutes. Don't you dare try to do everything yourself." "Yes, ma'am." We established our routine that first night, writing it down on a piece of notebook paper and taping it to the concrete wall like it was a sacred text. 6 a.m. Wake up. Whoever slept last takes over cranking duty immediately. 1 hour minimum to get fresh air circulating. 7 a.m. Breakfast. 1 MRE packet split between the 2 of us. Noir gets a quarter can of cat food. 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Maintenance and improvement. Check seals, work on filtration system, organize supplies, anything productive. 12 p.m. Lunch. Canned soup or beans heated on the small camping stove. 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. the danger hours. The time when you're not busy enough to forget where you are but not tired enough to sleep. And we'd need to fill this time carefully or we'd go crazy. 6 p.m. dinner, our big meal, though that was relative. 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., more time to kill. Cards, stories, anything to keep our minds occupied. 10 p.m., sleep, or at least try. I let Noir out of his carrier. He emerged slowly, cautiously, the way cats do when entering new territory that they haven't personally approved. His nose twitched, taking in all the smells. His ears swiveled forward and back, cataloging sounds. His whiskers were pushed forward, gathering spatial information. Then he walked a complete perimeter of the entire shelter, tail held low, investigating every single corner with the thoroughness of a detective at a crime scene. Finding, as I had already known he would, 0 escape routes. Smart cat. He was checking for what I'd been checking for, a way out that wasn't the door we'd just sealed. There wasn't one. Finally, apparently satisfied with his reconnaissance, he jumped up onto one of the empty top bunks and settled into it like it was his personal throne, curling into a tight ball with his tail over his nose. "At least someone's comfortable," Martha muttered. We tried to sleep. I lay on my bunk. I'd taken the one above Martha so she wouldn't have to climb, staring at the concrete ceiling maybe 2 feet above my face. Close enough that I could reach up and touch it if I wanted to, being close enough that it felt like it was pressing down on me even though I knew that was just my brain playing tricks. I listened to Martha's breathing from below, listened to Noir's purring from across the shelter, listened to the silence that was somehow louder than any noise could have been. And I thought about everyone else in Queens. Mrs. Walsh, who made the best soda bread. Was she okay? Had she evacuated? Or was she out there right now breathing fog, scratching her skin? Mike from Murphy's Pub, who had to work his shift at 6 p.m. because he needed the money. Had he made it home? Or had he been caught outside when the fog rolled in? All my clients, all my neighbors. The kid at Home Depot who was too scared to quit. The bodega owner who sold me cat food. Were any of them still alive? How many people had died while I was loading supplies into my van? I fell asleep sometime around 3 a.m., my last conscious thought being a prayer to a God I wasn't entirely sure I believed in. Please let this end soon. Week 2, the new reality. 2 weeks in, and we'd settled into something that you might generously call a routine. The reality was that every day was exactly the same and also completely terrible in new and creative ways. The hand crank ventilation system became both our lifeline and our torture device, and the mechanism was old, 60-plus years of rust and neglect fighting every single turn. For the first few days, my arms burned constantly, my shoulders ached. Blisters formed on my palms, burst, formed again as calluses. But the alternative was suffocating in our concrete tomb, so we cranked. 15 minutes on, 5 minutes off, every single day, multiple times a day. After the first week, the motion became almost meditative. Crank, crank, crank. Feel the air move through the duct. You know that you're keeping yourself and the people you love alive through pure, stubborn physical effort. The air filtration system I'd built was crude but seemed to be functional. I had no way to actually test whether it was working, no equipment to measure particle counts or toxin levels. But we were breathing, and we weren't showing any of the symptoms I'd seen in that man on the street. No itching, no skin issues. No breathing problems beyond the normal stuffiness of recycled air in an enclosed space. So I chose to believe it was working. The bucket toilet situation was exactly as horrible as you'd imagine, and then worse. We designated the far corner of the shelter, as far from the sleeping area as possible, and set up our system. Plastic bucket with double trash bag liners. After each use, cover everything with a generous layer of quicklime. When the bag was full, tie it off. He'd dig a small hole in the opposite corner of the shelter, bury it, cover with more lime and a thin layer of concrete dust that I made by scraping the walls. It was disgusting. It smelled terrible despite our best efforts. But it was survivable. Noir, at least, had the decency to use the litter box I'd brought down. Good cat. Though he looked at us with what I swear was judgment every time we used the bucket. Food was rationed with mathematical precision. 1 MRE packet for breakfast. I split between Martha and me. That gave us maybe 600 calories each to start the day. 1 can of soup or beans for lunch, another 400 calories each, roughly. Slightly larger portions for dinner, maybe 1.5 cans total split between us. 800 calories each if we were lucky. Add it all up and we were each eating maybe 1,800 to 2,000 calories a day. Not starvation, but definitely not enough for 2 people doing significant physical labor. Cranking that fan burned more calories than you'd think. Noir got exactly 1/4 of a can of cat food per day. He made his displeasure with these portions known through aggressive yowling and judgmental stares. Martha kept meticulous records in her inventory notebook, tracking every single item we consumed down to the ounce. Her handwriting was neat and precise, each entry dated and categorized. And at this rate, she said during week 2, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she did calculations, we have approximately 20 weeks of food, maybe 22 if we cut portions slightly more. 20 weeks, 5 months, then we'd starve to death in this concrete box. We need to find a way to stretch it longer, she continued, her pencil tapping against the notebook. 30 weeks would be safer. 40 would be ideal. Grams, we're already eating the minimum for survival. If we cut more, we'll be too weak to maintain the shelter. Too weak to defend ourselves if someone tries to break in. Too weak to do anything except sit here and slowly die. She knew I was right. But 20 weeks felt like a death sentence with a timer attached. We'll figure something out, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Week 3. First contact. The scratching in the ventilation duct started on day 16. I was on fan duty. It was my morning shift, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., when I first heard it. Faint at first. Could have been the fan mechanism itself. Could have been my imagination running wild after 2 weeks underground. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then I heard squeaking, high-pitched and angry, echoing down the metal duct. Something was in there. Grams, I said quietly, not wanting to panic her but needing backup. Hand me the flashlight, the big one. She grabbed the heavy mag light, 5D cells, basically a club that also produced light, and brought it over without asking questions. Smart woman. I shone it up into the ventilation duct, past my filter assembly that was wedged into the opening. 2 eyes reflected back at me, glowing red like tiny dying stars. Too far apart to be a normal rat. This was a very big rat. Oh, hell no, I muttered. The rat, and I use that term loosely because this thing was about as much like a normal rat as I was like a earthworm, pushed against my filter assembly. I watched in real time as the activated carbon shifted, heard the mesh bag start to tear. Jack! Martha's voice had gone tight with fear. I see it. I see it. I dropped the flashlight and grabbed the Glock from where I'd stored it on a shelf near the door. Checked the magazine out of habit. 17 rounds. All I had left after buying only 200 to begin with. Every shot counted. The rat broke through the filter with a final push. It emerged into our shelter like something being born. Wet with condensation from the duct, angry, wrong in every possible way. It was easily the size of a beagle, maybe 35 pounds, with matted brown fur and those horrible glowing red eyes. It saw us. fixed those eyes on me specifically like it knew I was the threat. I made a sound that wasn't quite squeaking, more like chittering, almost like speech if speech was made of nightmares. Then it jumped at me. I fired. The sound in the enclosed concrete space was absolutely deafening, like being inside a bell when someone hits it with a sledgehammer. My ears immediately started ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. Noir yowled and disappeared under one of the bunks. Martha screamed, but I couldn't really hear it over the ringing, and the bullet caught the rat center mass. It landed hard on the concrete floor, twitched violently once, twice, then went still. Dead. I stood there for a moment, ears ringing, breathing hard, processing what had just happened. We'd been breached. Something had found a way in. And I'd just used one of my precious bullets, one of only 200 I had, to kill it. What the hell was that? Martha's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater, muffled by the ringing in my ears. You mutant rat. The fog must have... I gestured vaguely at the dead animal, unable to finish the sentence because I didn't actually know how fog caused genetic mutations. I just knew that, apparently, it did. I dragged the corpse to our waist corner, trying not to think too hard about the fact that I was touching it. It was heavy, had to be 40 pounds at least. Its claws were hardened, almost chitinous, like they were made of thick toenail material instead of normal keratin, and its teeth were too long, jutting out of its mouth even when closed. And its eyes, even in death, still seemed to glow faintly. I wrapped the whole thing in multiple layers of plastic bags from our supplies, sealed it up, buried it in our waste pit. We need to reinforce the ventilation, I said, my ears still ringing. If one got through, more will try. We spent the next 4 hours completely overhauling the filter system. I added multiple layers of mesh and screening, creating essentially a maze that anything larger than a mouse would have to navigate. Used every spare bit of wire mesh I'd brought, sealed gaps with duct tape and caulk. By the time we finished, I was confident that nothing rat-sized could get through. I hoped I was right. That night I didn't sleep well. Kept hearing scratching sounds that probably weren't there. Kept seeing those red eyes glowing in the darkness. Kept wondering how many more were out there, trying to find a way in. Month 2. The food crisis. Jack, we need to talk. It was Martha's serious voice, the voice that meant bad news was coming and I needed to sit down for it. What's up? She had her inventory notebook open, pages filled with her neat, precise handwriting, tracking every can of food, every MRE packet, every calorie we'd consumed over the past 8 weeks. At our current rate of consumption, she said, her finger tracing down a column of numbers, Joel, we have approximately 8 weeks of food remaining. Maybe 9 if we cut our portions even further. 8 weeks, 2 months, then starvation. We could stretch it to maybe 10 weeks if we... Grams, we're already rationing as hard as we can without becoming too weak to function. If we cut portions any more, we won't have the energy to crank the ventilator. We won't be able to defend ourselves if someone tries to break in. We'll just be sitting here slowly wasting away until we're too weak to even stand. She knew I was right, but she also knew that running out of food was a concrete, unavoidable death sentence. There are rats, I said slowly, the idea forming even as I spoke it out loud. Coming down through the vents. We've already killed one. If I could find a way to trap them instead of shooting them, save ammunition and get food at the same time. Jack, no! What else are we going to do? Lord, we can't go outside. We can't call for help. We're completely cut off. In 8 weeks, we'll be out of food and then we'll die. At least this way we have a chance. We are not eating mutant rats. We are if the alternative is starving to death in a concrete tomb. We stared at each other across the shelter. The thing about crisis situations is that they strip away all the comfortable lies you tell yourself about what you will and won't do to survive. In all the lines you think you'd never cross suddenly become very negotiable when death is the only alternative. "I'll build a trap," I said finally. "We'll see if we can even catch one. Then we can decide." She didn't argue, just closed her notebook and looked away. Month 3. The first harvest. The trap took me 3 full days to build, working with the limited materials I had available. I used wire mesh from our supplies, originally intended for reinforcing the ventilation system, and bent it into a rectangular cage about 3 feet long. Created a trigger mechanism using string and a stick that would slam a door shut when the rat took the bait. It was crude, probably wouldn't have won any engineering awards, but it was based on the same basic principle humans have been using to trap animals for literally thousands of years. Function over form, and I baited it with half a can of tuna. Noir's tuna, which earned me some seriously withering looks from the cat, and positioned it directly under the ventilation duct where I'd killed the first rat. Then we waited. 12 hours later, we caught our first one. It was even bigger than the one I'd shot. Had to be 50 pounds, maybe more. Red eyes glowing in the candlelight, matted gray fur. Those disturbing chitinous claws that looked more like insect parts than mammal parts. And it threw itself against the cage when it realized it was trapped, snarling and making that chittering, almost speech sound that made my skin crawl. The whole cage rattled and shook, but the construction held. I stood there looking at it for a long moment. It looked back at me with those intelligent red eyes, and I swear I could see something in them. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. Like it knew what was about to happen. "I'm sorry," I said. Meant it too. And then I killed it as humanely as I knew how. Quick thrust with my spear through the cage bars, angled up into the brain. It went still instantly, no suffering, small mercy. Butchering it was infinitely worse than killing it. I won't give you all the graphic details, you don't need them, and I don't want to relive them. But here's what you need to know. It took me almost 2 hours of work with a kitchen knife that wasn't really designed for this purpose. I threw up twice, once from the smell and once from just the sheer horror of what I was doing. The inside of a mutant rat apparently looks pretty similar to the inside of a normal rat, just scaled up, which somehow made it worse rather than better. When I was finally done, I had approximately 20 pounds of usable meat, stripped from the bones and cut into chunks. Martha cried when she saw it, just sat on her bunk with her face in her hands and cried. "I know, Grams," I said quietly. "I know, Ian, but we're going to survive this, whatever it takes." Cooking it over our small propane camping stove was an exercise in not thinking too hard about what I was doing. The smell was wrong. Like pork mixed with sewage, mixed with something chemical that I couldn't identify. It filled the entire shelter, making my eyes water. The taste was even worse. Gamey, bitter. Chemical aftertaste that lingered, like eating bad pork that had been soaked in gasoline. I ate it anyway. I forced myself to chew and swallow, even though every bite made my stomach rebel. Martha cried while she ate, but she ate, because the alternative was starvation, and we both knew it. Noir, interestingly, had no such qualms. He ate his portion. I'd cooked a piece specifically for him, with obvious enthusiasm, which was both reassuring. If the mutant cat could eat mutant rat and be fine, maybe we could too, and deeply disturbing. "We're going to survive this," I said again, forcing down another bite of the worst thing I'd ever eaten. "Whatever it takes." Over the next 2 weeks, we caught and ate 6 more rats. Each one was slightly less horrible than the last, not because it got better, but because you can apparently get used to anything when you're desperate enough. And I started to notice something else. Noir was changing. Month 4. The mutation. The first time I consciously registered that Noir was growing, I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. 4 months of living in a concrete box with recycled air and rat meat and the constant threat of death. 4 months of minimal sleep and maximum stress. It made sense that I'd start hallucinating things. Except Martha saw it too. "Jackie," she said one morning during week 16, staring at Noir where he was grooming himself on his bunk. "Is it just me, or is the cat getting bigger?" I looked, really looked, tried to be objective about it, and he did look bigger. Definitely bigger. "We should measure him," I said. We used a piece of string and marked his length on the concrete wall with pencil, then compared it to the mark I'd made when we first came down to the shelter. Had that really been 4 months ago? 3 full inches longer. In 4 months. "Cats don't grow like that," Martha said. "Not at 5 years old, not ever. Grams, nothing about this situation is normal." But she was right. Cats reach their full size by about 18 months and then they're done growing. They don't suddenly put on 3 inches of length when they're 5 years old. Unless something was making them grow. We watched him carefully over the following weeks, documenting the changes. It became a bit of an obsession, actually, something to focus on besides our slowly dwindling food supply and the constant fear. He was definitely getting longer, heavier, and his muscles were developing in ways that didn't quite look right, too pronounced, too defined, like a bodybuilder cat. His paws were getting bigger too. And his claws, I noticed this during week 18 when he was kneading his blanket, were getting harder, darker. Less like normal keratin and more like black glass or obsidian. And his eyes were starting to develop that same faint glow that the rats had. Not bright, just a barely perceptible luminescence when the candles burned low, like he had his own internal light source. "The fog," I said one night, stating the obvious. "When we ran down here from the apartment, he was exposed for maybe 30 seconds while we were getting him into the carrier. He breathed some of it in. But he's not sick," Martha pointed out. "He's not scratching. He's not showing any of the symptoms we saw in that man on the street. He's just growing. He's mutating, just differently than the rats." We should have been terrified. Should have considered him a potential threat. Thought about whether we needed to, I don't know, lock him in the bathroom? Get rid of him somehow? But he was still Noir. Still purred when Martha petted him. Still knocked things off the table for no discernible reason except cat logic. Still presented his butt directly in my face when I was trying to sleep, just bigger and stranger, and possibly becoming something that could help keep us alive instead of killing us. I decided to view it as a positive development. Month 6. The attack. They came at 3 a.m. on day 172. I was on fan duty, my graveyard shift midnight to 4 a.m., when I heard voices outside the shelter door. Not rat sounds, not animal sounds, human voices. Telling you there's people in there. Building's got a Cold War shelter, they gotta be using it. Yeah, but how we getting through 8 inches of steel? That thing's built like a bank vault. We don't need to get through, we just gotta convince them to open up. My heart was suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed the Glock from its storage spot, checked the magazine even though I knew exactly how many rounds I had left, 83. Precious, irreplaceable bullets that I'd been saving for absolute emergencies. This qualified. "Grams," I whispered, moving to her bunk and gently shaking her shoulder. "Wake up. We've got company." She came awake instantly, a skill you develop when you've survived as much as she has, and sat up, eyes sharp and alert despite it being 3 a.m. The banging started, heavy rhythmic impacts against the steel door. They were using something, sounded like a hammer or a heavy pipe, trying to force entry or at least get our attention. "We know you're in there," a man's voice, rough and desperate. "We're not here to hurt you. We just need food." Please. Martha gripped my arm hard enough to hurt. Jack, we have to help them. No, but they're starving. And if we let them in, we'll all be starving. Do the math, Grams. We have maybe 3 months of food left for 2 people and a cat. We let in 3 more mouths, or however many of them there are. And we're all dead in 6 weeks, maybe less. But we can't save them. We can only save ourselves. We're just people trying to survive, the voice outside shouted. Ada and I could hear the desperation in it. Same as you, we've got kids out here, please. That hurt. The mention of kids, because if there really were children out there hungry and scared and we were refusing to help. But I'd also heard stories. Rumors even before the fog about what desperation does to people during disasters. The guy begging for food today with tears in his eyes is the same guy who'll slit your throat for a can of beans tomorrow when he gets hungry enough again. I'm armed, I shouted back through the door, and I will shoot anyone who gets through. This is your only warning. Silence for a moment. Then, fuck you then, fuck you, and I hope you die down there. We'll come back with fire, with tools. You can't stay in there forever, asshole. The banging continued. For the next 2 hours, they tried everything. Hammers. What sounded like a crowbar trying to pry at the door edges. An axe or something similar, the blade screaming against steel. And the door held. 8 inches of Cold War paranoia, earning its keep after 60 years. Finally, around 5 a.m., they gave up and left. But we both knew that they'd be back. Next time with better tools, more people, real weapons. We needed to be ready. Part 3. The War for Survival, Month 7. Arsenal. I spent the entire next week turning our fallout shelter into a fortress, and the Glock had 78 rounds left after the warning shot I'd fired to scare away that first rat. At my current usage rate, 1 rat every few days, potential human threats, general emergencies, I'd be completely out of ammunition in maybe 3 months. After that, I'd need alternatives. So I built them. Project 1, the crossbow, Mark II. I'd been thinking about this since month 2, but hadn't had the materials or motivation. Now I had both. In materials, heavy-duty PVC pipe, 2-inch diameter, pressure-rated, guitar strings from an old cat toy that Noir had destroyed months ago, coil springs that I carefully extracted from the bunk bed frames without making them collapse, duct tape, the plumber's best friend, and diesel fuel plus cloth scraps for fire arrows. Attempt 1. Complete failure. The PVC snapped when I tried to cock it. Too much tension, not enough structural support. Attempt 2. Better, but couldn't generate enough force to be useful as a weapon. The bolt barely made it 10 feet. Attempt 3. This was the charm. I used 2 springs working in parallel, giving me double the force. Reinforced the PVC with steel wire I stripped from the bunk frames. The trigger mechanism was an absolute nightmare to engineer using only a pipe clamp and some zip ties, but after 40 hours of tinkering, I got it to work reliably. Test shot. 18 feet across the shelter. He punched completely through a plastic water jug and kept going, embedding itself an inch deep in the concrete wall. Not bad for a post-apocalyptic DIY project. I made 12 bolts from sections of steel rod cut to length and sharpened at one end. Half of them I left plain, sharp points that could punch through bone if I got a good shot. The other half I wrapped tightly with diesel-soaked cloth, creating fire arrows that would ignite from the friction of being fired. Project 2. The spear. This was much simpler, almost embarrassingly so. I took my best kitchen knife, an 8-inch chef's knife that had been a Christmas present 3 years ago, and duct-taped it securely to a 6-foot length of wooden pallet board. Then I spent several hours sharpening the blade on the concrete floor, using water and pressure and patience until it was sharp enough to shave hair off my arm. Not elegant, but functional. Project 3. The itch trap. This was my nastiest creation, and I felt a bit like a war criminal building it. I'd noticed from watching that man on the street, and from hearing reports before we sealed ourselves in, that the fog caused intense itching before the necrosis set in. Whatever was in the fog attacked the skin first, made people claw at themselves before it started actually killing them. So I decided to weaponize that. In recipe, fog water collected from our ventilation filters, always wearing 3 layers of gloves, treating it like the toxic sludge it was. Chili powder from our spice supplies, chlorine bleach from our cleaning supplies mixed carefully in spray bottles. The theory was simple. Spray it on an attacker, the fog water would trigger the itching response, and the chili powder and bleach would amplify it to unbearable levels. They'd be too busy clawing at their own skin to attack us. Test subject. A small piece of my own dead skin that I'd cut from a callus on my foot. Results. Within 5 minutes, the skin was bubbling. Within 15 minutes, it was literally dissolving. I made 4 spray bottles of the stuff and positioned them at strategic locations around the shelter. Project 4. Noir's armor. By month 7, Noir had grown to about 50 pounds, roughly the size of a medium dog, and showed absolutely no signs of stopping. His claws had turned fully black and hard as obsidian. His teeth had grown longer. His eyes glowed bright enough in the dark that I could actually read by their light. He'd also started hunting on his own. I'd hear him in the ventilation ducts at night, hear the squeals of rats, hear the wet sounds of feeding. He'd drag the corpses back to the shelter, leaving them by my bunk like presents. Good cat. I decided to give him some protection. He'd using leather strips cut from my old work boots, which I didn't need anymore since I wasn't exactly going anywhere. I created a crude set of armor, wrapped it around his torso and neck, secured with more strips. Protection against bites and claws if he got into a serious fight. He tolerated it with the infinite patience of a cat who understands that his human is an idiot but allows it anyway because he loves me. When they came back, and they would come back, we'd be ready. Month 8, the battle. They returned on day 237. This time they brought 8 people. I counted by the voices, by the different tones and accents. And this time they brought fire. Last chance! The same leader from before, his voice hoarse like he'd been shouting a lot lately. Open up or we burn you out. I could smell it before he finished speaking. Gasoline, the sharp, distinctive chemical scent seeping under our supposedly sealed door. And they were splashing it against the walls outside the shelter, against the door itself. They were going to set the building on fire, force us out through smoke inhalation. It was smart, cruel, and probably effective. Grams, help me with the spear wall, I said, my voice surprisingly calm given that my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. We deployed the defensive system I'd built over the past month, metal spikes that I'd created from broken-down bunk bed pieces, each one sharpened to a wicked point. They jammed into pre-drilled holes in the floor, creating a forest of sharp metal points directly in front of the door. I grabbed my crossbow, loaded one of the fire arrows, positioned myself at an angle to the door where I'd have a clear shot at anyone who came through. Martha, get behind the bunks with Noir. Do not come out no matter what you hear. Jack, now, Grams. Smoke started seeping under the door. Thin wisps at first, and then thicker. They'd lit it. We had maybe minutes before the smoke became too thick to breathe, before we'd have to open the door or suffocate. I made a decision. I opened the door myself, not all the way, just 6 inches. Far enough to see out, to aim, but not far enough for anyone to get through easily. Smoke poured in immediately. Behind the smoke, I could see them. 8 people, just like I'd counted. Gaunt, desperate, armed with pipes and knives and the kind of desperation that makes people capable of anything. The leader, The same guy from before, I recognized his voice, took a step forward. "Finally being smart," I fired. The fire arrow caught him center mass. The diesel-soaked cloth ignited from the friction of the shot, and suddenly he was on fire, screaming, stumbling backward into the others. "Next!" I shouted, already loading another bolt. "Who wants to be next?" For a moment, they hesitated. Good. Fear was a survival mechanism even in desperation. Then they charged anyway, because they had nothing left to lose. The first one through hit the spear wall. I heard the impacts, 3 separate points finding flesh, and his scream as he realized what had happened. He hung there, impaled, trying to pull himself off, but only making it worse. The second one got the itch spray, and I grabbed one of the bottles I'd positioned earlier and gave him a full blast directly to the face. He started clawing at his skin immediately, screaming, tearing at his own face with his fingernails. The third one almost made it through the spear wall, somehow dodging most of the points. That's when Noir hit him. I barely saw the cat move. One moment he was behind the bunks with Martha. The next moment he was a black blur of muscle and claws and teeth. He hitting the man like a furry missile. Noir's claws, those obsidian-hard black claws, ripped through the man's jacket and shirt and skin like they were tissue paper. His teeth, too long, too sharp, found the throat and didn't let go until the man stopped moving. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. The remaining 5 attackers took one look at the carnage, their burning leader, the impaled man still screaming on the spear wall, the guy clawing his own face off from the itch spray, and the dead man in Noir's jaws, and ran. Smart. I slammed the door shut, spun the wheel lock, sealed us back in. Then I stood there with my back against the steel, breathing hard, shaking so badly I could barely stand, processing what had just happened. We'd killed 3 people, maybe 4 if the leader died from his burns. I'd become a murderer to protect a concrete box and some cans of food. "Jack," Martha's voice from behind the bunks, small and scared. "It's over. We're okay." But we weren't okay. We'd never be okay again. Noir walked over to me, blood on his muzzle, and rubbed against my legs, purring. Good cat. Best cat. Killer cat. He'd saved our lives. Month 9. The Discovery Noir disappeared for 12 hours on day 263. 1 minute he was there, sleeping on his bunk like he always did during the afternoon. The next minute he was gone, somehow squeezing his 100-pound mutant body through the ventilation duct that should have been way too small for him. I thought we'd lost him. Thought he'd finally decided to abandon ship, to take his chances in the fog-filled world above rather than stay in a concrete tomb with 2 humans who were slowly losing their minds. Then he came back, through the vent, dragging something. Not a rat this time, a person. Or what was left of one. "Oh God," Martha whispered, covering her mouth with both hands. The body was fresh, maybe a day dead at most. Male, maybe 30 years old. No visible wounds on him. He'd just stopped. Exposure to the fog, probably. Suffocation as the contaminated air destroyed his lungs from the inside, but that's not what made me stare. He was clutching something in his dead hand, holding it so tightly that his fingers had locked into rigor mortis around it. A radio, and not a cell phone. Those had been completely dead since week 1, killed by the electromagnetic interference the fog created. But an old-fashioned transistor radio, battery-powered. The kind my grandfather had owned back in the day. Someone had modified it. Added a longer antenna made from coat hanger wire. Boosted the receiver circuit. This was the work of someone who knew electronics, who understood how to coax signals out of dead air. I carefully pried it from his fingers, trying very hard not to think about the fact that I was robbing a corpse, and examined it in the candlelight. It looked functional. Battery compartment had 2 AA batteries that still had a bit of charge left. I turned it on. Static. Pure white noise. The kind that says no one's out there, no one's broadcasting, you're completely alone. Then, faint beneath the noise, I heard something that wasn't random. A pattern. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Morse code. I grabbed my notebook, the same one Martha used for inventory, and a pencil. Wrote down the dots and dashes as I heard them. Remembered the Morse code chart from Boy Scouts a literal lifetime ago. Long, short, short, long. Short, long, short. Translated letter by letter, it said, SOS, need help. Shelter in Queens, 247 rats killed, food running low, if anyone can hear this. It repeated, over and over, and an automated message from someone who was still alive somewhere in Queens. Someone who was broadcasting into the void, hoping that another human might receive it. We're not alone, I whispered. Martha was crying. Relief, maybe, or grief for all the ones who weren't broadcasting, who died in silence. I spent the next week modifying the radio, working by candlelight with tools that weren't meant for this. Added our own transmitter capability using copper wire from the ventilation system, batteries from our flashlights, and parts I cannibalized from other electronics. It was crude, probably violated about 17 FCC regulations. But it worked. Then I sent our own message, tapped out in Morse code every hour. Harlan Shelter, 2 adults, 1 cat, alive. Food for 3 to 4 more months. Can you hear this? I sent it every hour for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, barely eating, just sitting by that radio and transmitting and listening and transmitting again. On the 4th day, someone answered. Part 4, Hope in the Dark Month. 12, Dr. Martinez. Shelter. Repeat, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Columbia University. If anyone can hear this, we have found a potential solution to the fog. We need... The signal cut out, replaced by static. I frantically adjusted the antenna, tweaked the frequency dial with shaking hands, my heart pounding. The mutant cat, the one that's been reported in the Queen Shelter messages. Its biological signature suggests... Static again. The signal was weak, fighting through interference that the fog created. But I'd heard enough. They knew about Noir. They thought he was important. They had a solution. Grams! I was shouting, couldn't help it, the first real hope I'd felt in a year, making my voice crack. Grams! Someone answered. They have a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, we established regular communication with Dr. Martinez's group. The signal was always choppy, always fighting static, but we managed to have actual conversations via Morse code. They were holed up in a Columbia University laboratory at the very edge of the fog zone, about 2 miles from our shelter. 2 miles that might as well have been 200 given the fog's density, the mutant creatures, and the fact that I'd be carrying a 60-pound cat through a toxic hellscape. Doctor, and Martinez explained slowly and in simplified terms, since Morse code isn't great for complex scientific concepts. The fog was caused by bacteria, artificially created. It was supposed to be a tactical biochemical weapon, something the military could deploy against enemy troops that would cause confusion and casualties without destroying infrastructure. But when the Patterson facility leaked, the bacteria escaped and found the perfect environment to multiply in New York City's humidity and population density. It mutated in atmospheric conditions, became something much worse than intended. Can you stop it? I tapped out. Maybe. Need your cat. His mutation may be key. That's what she kept coming back to. Noir. His mutation. The fact that he'd been exposed to the fog, and instead of dying or becoming mindless like the rats, he'd become something else, and something potentially useful. How do I get him to you? I transmitted. Can you travel 2 miles? I looked at our food supplies. Martha's inventory showed 6 weeks left. Maybe 7 if we were very careful. Not enough. We were going to starve anyway. But Martinez's group had supplies, and more importantly, they had hope. "Yes," I transmitted back. "Will come." Month 14. The journey. I spent 2 full days preparing for the journey. He made Noir a carrier from sheet metal and leather straps, basically a backpack cage with breathing holes and internal padding. He was not pleased about the test fit, making his displeasure known through aggressive yowling and one attempt to shred my arm. "I know, buddy," I told him while wrestling him into the carrier. "I know you hate it, but you're too big to walk 2 miles through toxic fog, and I can't carry you without some kind of container. Work with me here." For myself, I packed light, crossbow with 10 bolts, spear strapped to my back, 3 itch spray bottles clipped to my belt, the Glock with my last 47 rounds, flashlight, compass, which probably wouldn't work but hope springs eternal, and a determination born of desperation. Martha couldn't come. We both knew it. At 75, after a year underground, she simply didn't have the physical capability to make a 2-mile journey through a toxic hellscape filled with mutant creatures. "In you come back," she ordered, grabbing my face with both hands and looking into my eyes. Not a request, a command. "Yes, ma'am." "With that ridiculous cat." "Yes, ma'am." "And with hope. You bring back hope, Jackie." "I'll do my best, Grams." She hugged me then. A real hug, tight and fierce, the first real physical affection either of us had shared in months. "I'm so proud of you. Your grandfather would be proud. Your parents would be proud." I couldn't speak. I just held her until she pulled away. Then I opened the door, for the first time in 14 months, and stepped into hell. The world had ended while I was underground. The fog was still there, still black as oil, but thinner than I remembered from that last night when we'd sealed ourselves in. Visibility varied, maybe 10 feet in some places, 20 in others. Like walking through clouds that shifted and breathed and tasted like chemicals when I accidentally inhaled too deeply despite my mask. The streets were empty, not deserted, empty. Like someone had erased all the people. Bodies everywhere, or what remained of them. Mostly just bones at this point, the fog and time having stripped away flesh, leaving skeletons in clothing that looked almost peaceful given the horror of their deaths. Cars sat abandoned mid-street, and doors hanging open like their drivers had just stepped out for a moment and would be right back. Some had keys still in the ignition. Some had bodies still in the driver's seats, skeletal hands still gripping steering wheels. Every building was dark. No power, no lights, just the fog and the silence and my footsteps echoing off concrete. Noir was heavy on my back, shifting occasionally in his carrier. But he wasn't making noise, which I took as a good sign. And maybe he understood the gravity of the situation, or maybe he was just conserving energy. I'd walked maybe 3 blocks when I heard it. Scratching, behind me, multiple sources. I spun around, crossbow ready. Rats, 5 of them, each one the size of a large dog, red eyes glowing in the fog like demonic Christmas lights. They'd been following me, I realized, tracking me, pack-hunting behavior that normal rats definitely didn't have. They spread out as I watched, flanking me on both sides, showing tactical intelligence that made my skin crawl. "Not today," I muttered, loading a bolt into the crossbow. The first one charged. I fired, caught it through the skull. It dropped and didn't get up. The other 4 hesitated, which told me they were smart enough to learn from watching their packmate die. Then Noir made a sound from his carrier. Not meowing. Something deeper, darker. A warning growl that I'd never heard from him before, vibrating through his chest and into my back where the carrier pressed against me. The rats scattered, just vanished into the fog like they'd never existed. "Good cat," I said, my hands shaking. "Very good cat." The journey took 6 hours. 6 hours of navigating by dead reckoning because the compass did indeed spin uselessly. the magnetic field completely scrambled by whatever the fog did to physics. In 6 hours of avoiding rat packs and snake dens and other survivors who might be desperate enough to kill me for my supplies. 6 hours of breathing fog that made my lungs burn and my head pound even through my improvised mask. But I made it. Columbia University's old biology building. The address Martinez had transmitted. A concrete structure that looked like it had been designed to survive nuclear war, which, given the era it was built in, it probably had been. And I knocked on the steel door at the loading dock entrance with the pattern Martinez had specified. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. The door opened a crack. A face appeared. Young Asian female, wearing a respirator mask that looked a lot more professional than my improvised setup. "Jack Harlan? That's me. And you brought the cat?" I twisted to show her Noir in his carrier, he glaring at her with glowing red eyes like he was personally offended by her existence. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "You actually brought him. Come in quickly before something else finds you." I stepped through the door into salvation. The breakthrough Dr. Sarah Martinez was 43 years old, looked 63, and had the kind of exhausted determination that said she'd been pushing herself past human limits for months on end. "We've been working non-stop since the fog started," she said, leading me through corridors lit by emergency lighting and into what had been converted into a makeshift research laboratory. The building's basement was crammed with equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, things I didn't recognize but which looked expensive and scientific. The fog is caused by a genetically engineered bacteria. It was supposed to be a tactical weapon, but it mutated in atmospheric conditions and became... this. Someone made this? I felt my hands clench into fists. Someone created a weapon that killed millions of people. Not intentionally. The Patterson facility was reactivated to produce biochemical warfare agents for potential use in the Pacific Theater. But the containment protocols from 1989 were outdated. When the bacteria escaped, it found the perfect environment to proliferate in New York's humidity and population density. And then it mutated. It became worse than anyone imagined. "Can you stop it?" "That's where your cat comes in." She approached Noir's carrier cautiously. He hissed at her but didn't attack, which I took as a good sign. "May I?" "Be careful. He bites." She opened the carrier slowly. Noir emerged like a king surveying conquered territory, suspicious, regal, ready to murder anyone who displeased him. Martinez reached out with a gloved hand. Noir sniffed it thoroughly, then allowed her to touch his fur. "And remarkable," she whispered. "His fur is secreting something. An enzyme, I think. I need to run tests, but if I'm right..." She looked up at me and I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes in over a year. Hope. "If you're right, what?" "His mutation created a biological countermeasure to the fog bacteria. His body adapted to fight it instead of succumbing to it. If we can synthesize the enzyme his fur produces, we might be able to create a treatment. Something that could neutralize the fog, break down the bacteria, clear the air." "How long would that take?" "I don't know. Months, maybe. We'd need to sequence the enzyme, figure out how to produce it synthetically, test it extensively." "We don't have months. My grandmother has maybe 5 weeks of food left in our shelter. Then we work fast." For 10 days, Martinez and her team worked around the clock. I helped where I could, and which mostly meant keeping Noir calm while they took samples. Fur, blood, saliva, everything they could think of. He tolerated it with varying degrees of feline displeasure. Knocked over 3 beakers, shredded 1 lab coat, peed in someone's briefcase to express his opinion of the whole situation. But he cooperated. Maybe he understood on some level that this was important, or maybe he just liked the attention. On day 11, Martinez burst into the room where I was sleeping. And it worked. I sat up so fast I nearly fell off the cot. What? The enzyme culture, we managed to synthesize it, and it works, Jack, it actually works. The enzyme breaks down the fog bacteria on contact. Not just neutralizes it, actually destroys it. If we can produce enough of this and disperse it into the fog, we can cure the city. We can cure the world. The enzyme is self-replicating. Once we release it, it'll spread through the fog bacteria like wildfire. Anywhere the fog exists, the enzyme will follow and destroy it. I grabbed her shoulders. How long? To produce enough for initial deployment? Days. To clear all of New York? Maybe weeks, maybe months, but Jack... She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. We won. We actually won. The clearing. They deployed the cure on day 15 of my stay at Columbia. Industrial sprayers mounted on the building's roof, in literally just spraying enzyme culture into the fog like the world's most important pest control operation. Day 1. Nothing visible changed. Day 2. Still nothing. Day 3, I noticed the fog was thinner in some areas. Day 4, I could see across the street. Day 5. The sun came through. Actual sunlight. Real, honest-to-God sunlight. For the first time in 16 months. It was just a dim glow at first, filtered through the remaining fog like sunrise through heavy clouds. But it was there. It was real. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I stood on the roof of Columbia's biology building, Noir in my arms, still mutant-sized but calmer now, seeming to sense that something had changed, watching the fog dissolve like morning dew burning off. Martinez stood beside me, crying. Everyone on her team was crying. "It's spreading," she said, her voice breaking. "The enzyme is self-replicating just like we hoped, self-dispersing. It'll clear all of Queens in maybe a month, all of New York City in 3 months. Anywhere the fog exists globally, the enzyme will eventually reach it and destroy the bacteria." "We won," I repeated, testing the words. They felt true. Finally, impossibly, they felt true. Reunion, I went back for Martha on day 20. The walk was easier this time. The fog was down to maybe chest height, patchy in some places, almost clear in others. The rats had mostly died. Apparently, they couldn't survive without the fog's bacteria. The snakes had retreated back into the sewers where they belonged. The city was still dead, but it was getting better. You could feel it. I opened the shelter door using the wheel lock that had kept us safe for so long. "Grams? Jackie?" Her voice from inside, disbelieving. "Is that really you?" "It's me. And I brought the best news." I stepped inside. She was thinner than I remembered, older, more exhausted, but alive. "It's over," I said. "The fog is clearing. There's a cure. Dr. Martinez's team figured it out using Noir's mutation. We're going to be okay, Grams. We're actually going to be okay." She cried. I cried. Noir walked between us, purring, because that's what cats do when their humans are having emotional moments. They pretend to be annoyed but secretly love it. "Let's go home, Grams." "Yes, let's go home." We walked out of that shelter together. Up the stairs, through the basement, out into the building's lobby where actual sunlight was streaming through the windows. Real sunlight, real air, real hope. We were alive, and we were going home. Epilogue. 6 months later, August 2027. They built the memorial in Flushing Meadows Park 3 months after the fog finally cleared completely. Bronze statue, larger than life. A man with a crossbow and a cat by his side, standing against stylized fog rendered in dark metal. They wanted to call it the Guardian of Queens. I told them that was a stupid name. I wasn't anyone's guardian. I was just a plumber who got lucky, who had a grandmother tough enough to crank a ventilation fan for hours at a time, who had a cat that mutated in exactly the right way at exactly the right time. But Dr. Martinez convinced me to let them do it anyway. People need symbols, she said, and we were standing in her lab. Back to normal research operations now, studying the long-term effects of fog exposure on survivors. They need hope. They need to be reminded that ordinary people can survive extraordinary things. So I agreed, with conditions. The plaque lists all 12 people from our extended shelter community who survived. We'd found others after the fog cleared, people who'd lasted in basements and subway tunnels and improvised bunkers. And it lists the names of those who didn't make it. It lists all the stories that deserve to be remembered. Because I wasn't the hero of this story, we all were. Every person who chose to fight instead of giving up. Every person who shared their last can of beans. Every person who cranked that ventilator fan until their arms gave out and then cranked some more. Today is the dedication ceremony. August 15th, 2027. 6 months after the last trace of fog disappeared from New York City, Queens is coming back to life, slowly. Most of the deaths happened in the first week before people understood the danger. Those of us who survived, who found shelter, who adapted, we're rebuilding. Population of Queens before the fog, 2.3 million. Population now, maybe 400,000. We lost almost everything, but we're coming back. Martha is here with me. She turned 75 in March, still sharp, still tough. I'm still the woman who kept us alive by refusing to give up even when giving up would have been so much easier. Noir is here too. He's back to almost normal cat size, though his eyes still glow faintly in low light and his claws are still obsidian black. The vet says he's healthy, just different. He's become something of a celebrity. People want to pet the cat that saved the world. He tolerates it with supreme feline disdain. The mayor is giving a speech, something about resilience, about New York tough, about how we survived because of people like me. I'm not really listening, I'm watching the sky. Clear blue sky, no fog, just sun and clouds and normal summer weather. And I'm thinking about everyone who didn't make it. Mrs. Walsh, who made the best soda bread. Mike from Murphy's Pub, who went to work his shift. The kid at Home Depot who was too scared to quit. All the names on the memorial. All the people who should be standing here but aren't. Are you okay? Martha asks quietly. Yeah, Grams. I'm okay. And I am. For the first time in over a year, I actually am. Because we survived, because the city is healing, because hope is possible even after the world ends, because we made it. Author's note. If you've made it this far through Jack's story, thank you. I know this wasn't easy to read. The violence, the moral compromises, and the existential terror of being trapped while the world dies. None of it was designed for comfort. I wrote this story in 2027, setting it in 2026 to 2027 because I wanted it to feel immediate. Real. Like it could have happened yesterday. Like it could happen tomorrow. Because here's the truth I wanted to explore. We are all stronger than we think we are. Jack Harlan is fictional. The fog is fictional. The mutant rats and the miracle cat are products of imagination. But the truth underneath isn't fictional. Real people survive extraordinary things every single day. Wars, disasters, personal apocalypses, they survive by doing the next thing, then the next thing, then the next. By holding on to loved ones, by finding humor in horror. By refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. That's not fiction, that's history, that's reality, that's human nature. As I write this in 2027, our world feels uncertain. Wars spreading, climate disasters accelerating, political chaos, 1,000 pressures that make us feel small and powerless and scared. Maybe you should be a little scared. Fear keeps us alert. Fear kept Jack alive, but don't let fear paralyze you. Because if I learned anything while writing Jack's story, it's this. We are remarkably good at adapting. at surviving, at finding light even in the darkest places, at cranking that metaphorical fan even when we don't think we have another turn left. And so yes, keep some extra supplies, keep some water. Not because I think the apocalypse is coming, but because being prepared is just being smart. But more importantly, keep your people close. Keep hoping, keep fighting, keep turning that crank even when your arms are burning, because you can. Because we all can. Because we're tougher than we know. And whatever comes, whatever fog drifts into your life, there will be blue sky again on the other side. Fresh air again, a hope again. To everyone navigating uncertain times, may you find your shelter when storms come. May you find your Noir when you need miracles. May you find the strength to survive whatever challenges drift your way. The world is always changing, always uncertain. We live in an age of rapid transformation, technological, environmental, social. It can feel overwhelming. But remember, humans endure. We've survived ice ages and plagues, world wars and famines, and we've crawled out of rubble. We've rebuilt from ashes, not because we're special, but because we're stubborn, because we refuse to quit, because we keep cranking the fan. This is a work of fiction. Jack and Martha and Noir aren't real. But the strength they represent, that's real. That's in all of us. Stay safe out there. In times that feel like they're falling apart, may we all find the strength to hold together. With respect, hope, and deep belief in human resilience, in the author for every grandmother who held families together through impossible times. For every unexpected miracle that saved us when we didn't know we needed saving. For every person who's ever cranked the fan when they thought they couldn't do one more turn. We're all Jack Harlan sometimes, and we're all going to be okay. Dedicated to the survivors of every crisis, large and small. Peace to you all. The end.